Okay. Okay, I think we fixed it. Now I'm gonna turn this down so I'm not peeking the mic constantly. Okay. Okay, we fixed it, chat. We fixed it. Okay. So, today, I decided we would read I Think My Husband is a Fucking Fish Person by Jade Green. This is from our Tales from the Creeps. Which, side note, I do not have a Reddit account. So I am just accessing this as like your average Joe, not somebody that is actually a part of Reddit. Just so you know. So let's go ahead and get started now that we are 20 minutes into stream and have finally figured out what the hell is going on with my mic. Well, we fixed it for now. Anyway, so let's get started. I'm going to start this by saying I love my husband. I truly do. He didn't start out like this. We've been married for about 5 years now, and up until this point, blissfully so, I might add. I'm sorry, I have to interrupt myself, but why? Anyway, I have to interrupt myself here, but this comes off as somebody that is very insecure about their relationship. I'm just saying. I met John at a party during our first year of college. Biology major, like me. He seemed to say all the right things, knew all the right people, and was quite attractive. We clicked immediately. After only one conversation, I'd fallen hard for him. Hook, line, and sinker. It wasn't long before we were dating. In a whirlwind of a year, we went from being introduced to moving in together to engaged and then married. In hindsight, I know I moved too quickly, but it didn't feel that way at all. It was like I'd known him forever. I was never so sure of anything as I was that John was my soulmate. The first indication that something was wrong came about a month ago. I'd woken up from a dead sleep in the middle of the night to the sound of running water. Looking over, I noticed John wasn't in bed, so I got up to look for him. I found him in the kitchen. He was standing at the sink, and as I crept closer, I could see that he was just staring blankly at the water pouring from the faucet. I reached out my hand and gently placed it on his shoulder, inadvertently breaking his trance and causing him to recoil like a snake. Shit! Oh! Honey, I'm sorry, I said. He didn't reply. He just began wiping his face and gasping, trying to catch his breath. Was he sleepwalking? He'd never done that before. John, are you okay? What were you doing? I asked, reaching over to shut the faucet off. When the water stopped flowing, he turned to look at me. Shit, I don't know. Must have been thirsty, he replied with a shrug and a slight chuckle. John was always such a smartass. In a playful way, of course, but I could still tell he was rattled by it. It seemed like he had zero recollection of how he got there. However, in the moment, I tried to shrug it off and shuffled him back into bed. I had work early the next morning, and I knew if I stayed up any longer, I wouldn't be able to get back to sleep. I cuddled up next to him, trying to settle back down into slumber. When I noticed John's body felt a little cold. John having Afghanistan flashbacks. So true, Harry. So true. He must be coming down with something, I thought. Or maybe my cooking had made him queasy and he just didn't want to say anything. I closed my eyes for what felt like only a second before my alarm clock began screaming at me. Next morning played out normally. We ate breakfast together, got dressed, and then headed off on our separate ways. In fact, the next few mornings went just that way. He didn't seem sick. It didn't seem like there was anything wrong at all. Hi, Rooster. I'm feeling better, yes. I am feeling better. It wasn't until about a week later that the next incident occurred. John had come home late from work that day. As I made dinner, he walked into the kitchen looking stressed out and distracted. Like he had a problem in his mind that he was desperately trying to work out. Not really an odd occurrence in and of itself, though. He'd often bring his work home with him. But this time, he looked distraught, almost upset. John was sick of her shit. Hey, you all right? I asked him. He slumped down onto the bar stool and leaned his body forward. Resting his elbows on the island, he began rubbing his temples. Yeah, I have a headache, he said. Oh, I'll get you some Advil. No, it's okay. You finish what you were doing. I can get it. I smiled and walked from the stove over to him, leaning over the island to kiss his forehead. When my lips met his skin, I was shocked by two things. One, he was ice cold to the touch. It was like kissing a refrigerator. And two, I was immediately hit with the bitter taste of salt. Reflexively, I pulled away. Then he looked up at me, his eyes slightly bloodshot and cradled by dark circles. You're getting sick, I said. Sonia, I'm not getting sick. You're freezing cold. Why can't you ever admit when you're feeling bad? Don't be stubborn. It doesn't make you any less of a man to be sick. I'm fine. It's just a headache, he said sternly. I threw my hands up in frustration. Whatever, John. Just take some medicine. I can't afford to catch whatever you've got. You know how much I have going on at work right now. Suddenly, he slammed his fist down on the island so hard that it rattled the keys and pocket change sitting beside him. Then he yelled, You don't think I have a lot going on right now, too? My heart dropped, and I shuddered, instantly taking a step backward. He'd never done anything like that before. Hell, he'd never even raised his voice at me. I didn't know how to react, but I didn't have much time to think about it before he started apologizing profusely, saying he didn't know what had come over him. I accepted it as an isolated incident, though. Just an outburst caused by a combination of stress and illness, I thought. After all, I'd heard that men turn in babies when they get sick. I didn't cuddle up to him in bed that night, though. Not just because I was worried about him being contagious. I was also still upset about the tantrum he'd thrown. It was a ridiculous thing to get that angry over, and I didn't want to be one of those wives who had to walk on eggshells around their husbands. I faced my night table and stared at my alarm clock for a while. A lump formed in my throat as I lay there, wondering if we'd just been in the honeymoon phase all this time. Now, the real John was starting to come out. The next morning, I awoke to the smell of cinnamon rolls, my favorite. I glanced over at the clock, 5:41 a.m. John must have felt so bad about yelling at me the night before that he'd gotten up early to surprise me with breakfast in bed. I pulled the covers closer to me and smiled, waiting anxiously with my eyes closed. Jolted back into consciousness by my alarm, I realized I must have fallen back asleep. I slammed my hand onto the top of it, frantically searching with my fingers for the off button. I squinted at the blurry red numbers. 6 a.m. It was time to get up, and he still hadn't come. Maybe things didn't go quite as smoothly as planned, and he was in the midst of some kind of kitchen mishap. I threw the covers off my body and made my way to the bathroom. As I passed the counter, I glanced down and noticed his shaving kit was out. He'd always leave it on the bathroom counter every morning after he used it, and I'd always put it away. He must have gotten up really early. I grabbed the kit and shoved it back into the drawer on my way out. While walking down the hallway, I called out to him, but he didn't answer. I turned the corner to discover the kitchen was empty. A tray of cinnamon rolls sat on top of the stove, untouched. I said his name a few more times, but nothing. I shuffled over to the front window of our house and looked toward our driveway. He was gone. What the fuck? I returned to the kitchen to find a note left on the island. Sonia, I'm so sorry for last night. I had to go into work early this morning, so I wanted you to wake up to something almost as sweet as me. Love always, John. I rolled my eyes and smiled. He was still the same John. I was just overthinking things. I mean, it was only natural at this stage of our relationship that we'd start seeing parts of each other emerge that we hadn't seen before. I shoved a cinnamon roll into my mouth and then began looking for a Tupperware to put the rest away. As I chewed, my taste buds began to detect a flavor that had no business being in a cinnamon roll, causing me to wince. Salt. You say that, Harry, you say that, but something tells me that John has been keeping secrets. I spat the bite out into the sink. Did he accidentally use salt instead of sugar? I went to the trash can to throw away the roll I'd bitten into and saw the empty Pillsbury canister sitting on top. Okay, so he didn't make them himself. Why in the hell did he add salt to them? Was this a joke because of how he'd acted the night before? Is that what he meant in the note by as sweet as me? I walked back over to the stove and tasted another cinnamon roll. Then another. And another. All of them full of salt. Some even felt soggy, like they'd been dipped in seawater. For Christ's sake. I threw the whole batch into the trash can, annoyed. Maybe he was trying to be funny, but we couldn't really afford to be wasting food like this, especially for a stupid prank. I crumpled up the note and started getting ready for work. That afternoon, I'd already decided I was going to confront him about those goddamn salty cinnamon rolls when he got home. I didn't find it to be very funny at all. In fact, the more I thought about it throughout the day, the more it pissed me off. What on earth would possess him to do something like that? By 7 p.m., dinner was ready, but he still hadn't arrived. I was starting to get worried. I called his cell phone, but he didn't answer. Instead, he texted back almost instantly. Hey, sorry, super busy right now. I'll be home soon. Did he know I was angry and was just avoiding me? He was well aware that that would only make it worse. I made myself a plate and plopped down on the couch, flipping through the channels before landing on some nature documentary on the Discovery Channel. By the time I'd finished eating, he still hadn't come home. I glanced down at my phone. No texts or calls. I got up, shut off the TV, and threw my plate into the sink. I left the rest of the food out on the stove and headed to the bathroom to shower, annoyed. He can just deal with it all himself whenever he decides to come home. When I walked into the bathroom, something stopped me in my tracks. His shaving kit. It was sitting out on the counter again. I was 100% positive I'd put it back in the drawer that morning. He'd come home at some point during the day and shaved again. My heart fell to the bottom of my feet. There was no way. John wouldn't cheat on me. He just wouldn't. Well, why would he need to shave again in the middle of the day? And why was he so late getting home from work? I stared down at the shaving kit, almost angry with it for being there. I decided not to put it away this time. I'll admit I cried in the shower. Just a little. Seems ridiculous now to have cried over something like that. I didn't have proof of anything. Just an inkling that something was off. But I can't blame myself for that moment of weakness. I didn't know what I didn't know. I couldn't have. I washed my face and composed myself, then reached down to grab my razor. When I did, I noticed there seemed to be this strange substance forming around the edges of the bathtub. It was like a white, gritty sediment. I looked down at the drain and it was starting to crust up right there too. Gross. Must be calcium buildup. I have to pick up some cleaner at the store. I got out of the shower and got dressed, glaring at the shaving kit. I didn't even go into the kitchen to see if he'd made it home yet. I just went straight to bed and started scrolling through YouTube until I found some mindless video to keep me company. It was my intention to stay awake until I heard him come in, but sleep found me much faster than I expected. It wasn't until I felt movement beside me that I realized he'd finally made it in. I squinted through the pitch black room trying to read the numbers on the clock, when I began to feel the icy cold drip of liquid landing on the side of my face. I slowly turned to see my husband leaning over me. His eyes were lifeless and glassed over. His mouth was downturned and hung open. And he was completely fucking drenched in water. I screamed and threw the covers off, flying out of bed to the other side of the room. John, what the fuck? His mouth was still hanging open, but he wasn't saying anything. He was just... well, it sounded like he was gurgling. Horrified, I flipped the light on and he instantly covered his face with his hands. John, what in God's name is going on? I shrieked. Why are you all fucking wet? He slowly removed his hands from his face and blinked several times while looking down at his body. Then mumbled, "Damn. Mustn't have dried off enough before I got into bed." Fish guy named John. Yeah, he literally found the first guy name and stuck with it. So true. Dried off from what? The shower. The fucking shower? No way. He looked like he'd just fully submerged himself in water and immediately got into bed. A huge wet spot in the sheets surrounded him, and droplets of water were still trickling down his face from his soaked hair. That doesn't make any sense, I yelled. He suddenly shot up from bed and whipped the comforter onto the floor behind him. Jesus Christ, Sonia, I get home late from work, exhausted, and now I gotta explain why I'm wet? The rage in his voice instantly froze me in place. My throat tightened, and I just looked at him in complete and utter shock. I actually questioned if I was dreaming this. John, you're scaring me. He stood there for a moment, staring at me, brows furrowed and fists balled up. His chest convulsed with heavy breaths. I don't know how else to describe it, but he didn't even look like John. My husband looked like a deranged maniac. Finally, his breathing began to slow, and he said, "I'm gonna sleep on the couch tonight. Sorry that I scared you. If you were a fishy guy, you wouldn't have just gone with John. You would have gone with, like, Sylvester or Ivan. Yeah, but Sylvester and Ivan are, like, really, like, distinctive names. Obviously, you would go with the most boring guy name ever. Just saying." He picked up his dripping pillow and stomped out of the room, slamming the door behind him. I'd gone from angry at him to disturbed to downright terrified. He was having some kind of psychotic break. That was the only logical explanation for all of this. The increased pressure at work was getting to him, or maybe he had a brain tumor. Oh, God. Either way, something was seriously wrong. This was so beyond anything in the realm of normal that I just couldn't let it go. If I had $1 for every time my husband crawled into bed with me while soaking wet, well, I'd have $1, which is still too fucking many. Not only was he acting strange from the standpoint of normal human behavior, but the ferocity of his latest outburst was wildly out of character for him. John was always so soft-spoken and goofy. We had a very light-hearted relationship. We'd often pick on each other, but he'd never been mean before. Never made me feel like he could be capable of violence. I composed myself and put new sheets on the bed. Then I quietly crept over to the bedroom door and pressed my ear up to it. His snoring echoed throughout the silent house. I let out a sigh of relief and crawled back into bed with only a couple of hours until it would be time to get up. There was no way in hell I'd be able to fall back asleep after all that, but I didn't know what else to do with myself besides lie there in the dark and think as I listened to his obnoxious mouth breathing coming from the next room. Okay, do you love this guy, or are you just gonna keep on roasting him like this? Like, bro. Like, yeah, I don't like it when Belgian snores either, but I don't call it obnoxious mouth breathing. Jesus, lady. Ugh. Sitting up. This woman hates him. How could she have married him? That's what I'm saying, Leafy. Like, bro. There's no way around it. John was going to have to go see a doctor. I just wasn't sure how I was going to get him to do that, considering how touchy he was about the subject of being sick. If I couldn't convince him with words, there was no way I could physically force him to go. Especially not now. It was like a switch had flipped, and he turned into a completely different person overnight. A stranger. An aggressive stranger at that, I swear. That look in his eyes? For a second, it felt like he actually wanted to hit me. I tossed and turned for the last remaining hours of the night, desperately trying to rationalize in some way what was going on. My scientific mind couldn't help it. But my specialty didn't focus on the human brain, or on humans at all. Actually, it was coastal ecology. Oh, hell no. I was joking about that there are many benefits to being a marine biologist thing. I did not expect there to be an actual marine biologist. Oh my god. Nah, fam. Basically, my job consisted of studying and working to protect the entire ecosystem of our coasts. My husband's wheelhouse was marine biology! No! Oh my god. Okay. He worked as an entry-level research assistant in a lab. We were both extremely logical, sound-minded people before all this. I can't stress that enough. At around 5 a.m., I heard his snoring stop abruptly. By then, I'd convinced myself that he might be dangerous. I knew if he wanted to, he could more than easily overpower me. From then on, I knew I'd have to tread lightly. At that point, God only knew what would set him off. Maybe it wouldn't be the counter he slammed his fist down on next time. I certainly wasn't going to bring up him being wet again. My heart began pounding in my chest, and I quickly turned over, pulling the blanket up to cover my face. There I was, so afraid of my own damn husband that I was pretending to be asleep just to avoid interacting with him. I heard his heavy footsteps approaching the bedroom. Then a pause, followed by the slow creak of the door opening. Fuck. I should have locked it. Terrified to move a muscle, I held my breath and my entire body instinctively locked up. Like when a cuttlefish spots a shark. I couldn't see his eyes on me, though. I felt them. The door began to creak again until I heard it latch back closed. The only problem was that I wasn't sure if he was outside or inside. I couldn't believe where I'd found myself. If someone had ever told me that one day I'd be hiding under the covers from my husband like a child afraid of the boogeyman, I would have laughed, then told them to fuck off. The toilet flushed from the bathroom across the hall, and I finally released the breath I'd been so desperately holding. I still didn't get up, though. Over the next hour, I listened to him shower, shave, and get ready for work, all while I lay there like a hermit crab who'd recoiled into its shell. When I finally heard the front door close and his engine start, I jumped up from bed and ran to the bathroom. I'd had to pee for so long, I thought I was going to explode. I sat on the toilet, rubbing my eyes as they adjusted to the light, when I caught sight of something shiny in my peripheral vision. But when I turned to look, I didn't see anything. I walked up to the mirror and began inspecting myself. I looked like absolute shit. Not even the best concealer in the world was going to cover up those dark circles. I turned on the faucet to start washing my face and noticed John's shaving kit sitting out. Out of habit, I picked it up. When I did, I hadn't seen it had been left open, so the contents came spilling out onto the floor. Shit. I bent down to begin picking everything up and immediately froze. On the ground, scattered amongst his razor, shaving cream, and aftershave lotion, was about a handful worth of silvery, iridescent fish scales. I stared down at the ground, suspended in motion, as my brain scrambled to make sense of what my eyes were seeing. Had there been a gas leak in the house and John and I had both been hallucinating this whole time? That would have explained a lot, actually. Slowly, I reached out my hand to touch one of them, just to make sure it was real. Not only was it real, it didn't feel like you'd expect a discarded fish scale to feel. It wasn't thin or rigid or even brittle. Instead, it had this strange, soft, rubbery texture to it. and it was slimy. Like it was fresh. "Oh, hell no!" I shrieked, flinging the scale across the room. It went flying and stuck to the wall when it hit. The sensation of it lingered long after it left my fingers. I felt disgusted, like I wanted to crawl out of my skin. My thoughts raced as I scrubbed my hands with Dial several times. What could he possibly be keeping these for? He must have taken them home from work and thought his shaving kit was his briefcase, but no, why would he just leave them loose like that? The lab wouldn't even let him leave the area without being in a specimen bag. Unless he snuck them out? Why would he do that? And why the hell would they still be fresh? My head was spinning. It was all too much. I walked out of the bathroom, leaving everything on the floor where it had fallen. At that point, I was almost certain he was losing his mind, and sure, he was starting to scare the hell out of me, but if something was wrong with his mental health, then he needed my help. As I started getting dressed for work, I came to the obvious conclusion that I had to start investigating. I couldn't just sit around and wait for the next bizarre event to take place. Things were escalating. For both my sake and John's, I needed to take action. Questioning him wasn't an option. I could try to get a look at his phone, but who knows when I'd get that chance. There was only one thing I knew for sure I could accomplish that day. I went over to my field bag and dug out a pair of gloves and a plastic specimen container. Then I went back to the bathroom and carefully collected a few of the scales on the floor. Picked up John's things, including the remaining scales, and shoved them all back inside the kit. Threw my gloves into the trash, then placed the shaving kit onto the counter, unzipped, and exactly where it was before. I didn't want him to know what I had found. My starting point was finding out exactly what type of fish the scales had come from. That might point to why I'd had them in the first place. I'll be honest. Even though it seemed like I was looking for logic in the decision-making of a madman, I felt I had to do something. When I got to work, I went straight over to Jessica's station. I knew that even though she and I weren't the closest co-workers, she was the only one I could trust. I glanced around to make sure no one else was in earshot, then said, "Hey, I need you to do me a weird favor. Unofficially." She smirked and said, "Okay, tell me what it is first, then I'll tell you if I'll do it." I took a quick look around the room again, then reached into my bag and pulled out the scales, holding them out towards her. "I need you to run an eDNA PCR analysis on these." She looked down at the container in my hand and raised an eyebrow. "Where'd you find them?" she asked. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." "All right, spill it. What's going on, Sonia?" I clenched my teeth and leaned closer to her and whispered, "I found them in John's stuff. I'm guessing he must have taken them home from work, but I don't know why." Seriously? Sonia, I'm swamped with a backlog of water samples to get through today, and you want me to spend a few hours doing this? What? Do you think he's trying to smuggle out some forbidden fish scales to sell on the black market or something?" she said with a laugh. "Jessica, look, I'm seriously freaked out, okay?" The words came out more frantic than I had intended, my voice beginning to tremble. Her facial expression instantly shifted in response to my tone. "What's going on?" she asked. "Honestly, I don't know." John's been acting really weird lately. And I found these this morning. I'm just trying to figure out if he's hiding something. Or if I need to make him an appointment with a neurologist. Her hand shot up to cover her mouth. Oh, God, she whispered, looking off and pausing for a moment before asking. Weird like how? Just not his normal self? I didn't even want to begin to try and explain what had been going on. It would just make me look just as crazy as it would him. But if I could help John, if I could find a way to fix whatever was going on with him before anyone found out about it, I'd never have to. I could just go back to how things were before and forget that any of this have ever happened. A few hours later, I looked up from my computer and saw Jessica standing over me with a very serious look on her face. We need to talk. I gulped hard. Shit. What had she discovered? Whatever it wasn't good, judging by her worried expression and hurried pace. I followed her back to her station, my heart pounding in synchrony with every step I took. What did you find? I asked. Nothing, she replied. That's the problem. What? Sonia, I can't identify these scales. They don't originate from any known species in the database, living or extinct. The closest comparison I can make is possibly something from the Stemophidae family, but these scales are much bigger. She handed me a piece of paper and I glared down at it in disbelief. 5 scales, 5 tests, and each result came back as a sample of unknown origin. The implications of this were unnerving, to say the least. I don't understand how this is possible. She looked at me with concern and lowered her voice. Does John have any connections for experimental labs or possibly even a biotech company? She asked. What? No, of course not. Well, whatever he's working on, it's not mainstream, I can tell you that much. I took a deep breath. Maybe John wasn't losing his mind after all. Maybe he'd gotten self-involved in something unsavory or even illegal. He's been trying to cover it up. Maybe all this crazy shit was just to throw me off or distract me. If he'd been trying to scare me just to keep me from asking too many questions, it was working. Please don't tell anyone about this, okay? I begged her. Shit, you don't have to tell me twice. No offense, Sonia, but I'd rather not be involved. Anyway, this is encroaching on fringe territory. That word scared me. Fringe. John was obsessed with his work. Once he found a thread, he'd pull at it relentlessly until he reached the spool. I knew if he had fixated on something unconventional, well, there was no telling how far he'd take it. When I returned to my desk, I did some research and learned that the family of fish she'd referred to were mostly species of deep-sea hatchetfish. Oh, geez. Okay. That was a bit scary. Anyway, John didn't even study those types of fish. He dealt exclusively with marine life that inhabited the epipelagic zone, where light could still easily penetrate the ocean surface. Hatchetfish were from the mesopelagic zone, also known as the Twilight Zone. That was about right. I felt like I'd suddenly found myself living in one of those old black and white episodes, and I was no closer to having any kind of answer. In fact, by digging into this, I'd only brought about more questions for myself. I spent the rest of the day agonizing over what I should do next. I couldn't focus on my work at all. Anytime I saw my boss, I'd hurry and pretend like I was in the middle of something when in reality I didn't accomplish a damn thing that day. That included figuring out my next move. Normally, whenever I needed help with a problem I couldn't work out, I'd go to John. Having to ignore that instinct felt unnatural. Felt wrong. I was hit with a wave of loneliness I'd never felt before, and it felt like a jellyfish had wrapped its tentacles around my heart. What an odd thing to say. What an odd thing to say, chat. After work, I sat in my car in the parking lot until about 6 p.m. I felt paralyzed. Nothing I thought of seemed to be the right choice. If I confronted him about any of it, there would be no telling how he'd react. On the other hand, if I just didn't say anything at all, he'd think he was getting away with whatever he'd been doing and continue. Suddenly, I felt a buzzing coming from my back pocket. It was a text from John. "Working late?" it said. Shit. Time's up. I steadied my hands and texted back. On my way now. I drove home, completely on autopilot. You know those drives where you end up at your destination with no memory of actually driving to get there? My mind was completely elsewhere. This was my last chance to come up with any plan of action. But instead, my thoughts played on an endless loop, each one bleeding into the next. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. At the front door, as I turned the knob, I abandoned any lingering thoughts of what to say or do. At that point, all I could do was wing it. I didn't know what I was walking into, so how could I even begin to try to prepare for it anyway? As a rule, I preferred to be proactive rather than reactive, but in this case, I didn't have a lot of choice in the matter. I threw out any hope of strategy, resigning myself to respond accordingly to whatever stimuli befell me. When I walked inside, I was instantly hit with the rich aroma of tomatoes and garlic. Something Italian. He knew it was my favorite. I slowly shut the door behind me. As soon as I did, he cheerfully called out from the kitchen. "Hey, Sonia, can you smell what the John is cooking?" God, that stupid joke. The few times he actually did cook, he always pulled that one out. Never got a laugh out of me, but he never quit trying. "Yeah, John, I can smell it," I replied, humoring him. At least he was in a good mood, I thought. Best not to rock the boat. My heart was still pounding, but so far things seemed normal. I put my bag down in the coat closet and shut the door to it, then made my way back down the hall and into the kitchen. He'd made a huge mess, but he looked so proud of himself, smiling and wearing his goofy-ass Kiss the Chef apron. "Spaghetti?" I asked, sitting down at the island. "Nope. Did you one better. Lasagna." "No way! Wow, that must have taken you forever." It wasn't too bad. Just had to watch a couple YouTube videos. Should be ready to come out of the oven any minute now. I just looked at him and smiled. I wanted to believe that this meant that the John I knew was back. He seemed so happy and carefree, cracking jokes and trying to wipe the splatters of red sauce from the walls before they dried. For a moment, I started to let all my dread and worry fall away and settle in the furthest corners of my mind. Maybe it had all just been a fluke, and the craziness was over now. I just wanted things to be normal again. So badly. I know I've been acting a little weird lately, he said, jolting all of those feelings back to the forefront in an instant. I swallowed hard. And I'm really sorry for that, he continued. Should I confront him now? Was this my opening to start asking him questions? I didn't want to kill the mood, but this seemed like my only chance. I opened my mouth, and then the kitchen timer went off. Oh, it's ready. Let's see how I did. Why don't you go find us something to watch? I'll make you a plate and bring it there. Okay, I replied. I went into the living room and flipped on the TV, surfing until I landed on Old Reliable. A rerun of Deadliest Catch was on. He walked in and handed me my plate of lasagna, soup. He hadn't let it set before he cut into it, so the contents had bled out all over the plate. But it still tasted just fine. He sat down beside me on the sofa with his own plate, then looked over at me and eagerly asked, So how is it? Really good, I mumbled through a mouthful of pasta and sauce. A huge, toothy grin stretched across his face. And then he said, I know you found my scales, Sonia. And that's it. That's the end of the story. That's worse. Okay, sorry. I did not realize that it was deleted on this page too. I'm sorry. Okay, but anyway, yeah. So that's the story. I needed a break from the previous tenant. Both because the grammar has been going steadily downhill with every reading, but also because I saw this in the sidebar being recommended, and I was just all like, "What in the hell?" So we had to read it. Chat. It was not optional. Notice the wording at the end there that he said, my scales. What does it mean by that? What does he fucking mean by that, chat? Anyway, I'm going to be heading out. Schedule will be up tomorrow on Discord and the day after on all my socials. So look for that. Oh, excuse me. Sorry. Had an air bubble caught in my throat. Anyway. And I will be taking Monday off just because I need a 3-day weekend. I desperately need a 3-day weekend. Thank you. Thank you for the biddies. Thank you. I need a 3-day weekend. So I'm taking Monday off, and then we will be streaming again on Tuesday. So I love you guys with your old here. Thanks for showing up. And I will see you guys next Tuesday. Bye, bye,